Hey everyone, good Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. Sorry, I'm losing track of days since I'm out of school. Good Tuesday afternoon and happy St. Patrick's Day. And I just realized that I'm not wearing green, but I have some green behind me. And luckily for me, none of you are close enough that you can pinch me. I'm wearing my school shirt, and of course, school colors are red. So, yeah, I'm sorry. So anyways, thanks for stopping in today. Obviously, my students, this is just kind of going to be our little bit of the way that we're going to communicate over the foreseeable future for whenever we're finally back in classroom. But what today we're going to be focusing on is the argumentative essay, which some would argue is the hardest of the 4 FRQs on the AP Gov exam, which was just introduced to the exam last year on the new AP Gov exam that we saw in 2019. So what we're going to be doing today is a little bit different than some of the other streams for Fiveable, because what we're going to be doing is not like an overview of content. I'm going to quickly review the argumentative essay and the rubric, but then we're going to look at a response together, and we're going to kind of brainstorm together here on this. And so that's why I said, if you didn't see it in the chat already, please have a piece of paper there with you and a pencil or pen, whatever it is you want to use, because we're going to be sharing out some of this, okay? So let's dive in here. So first thing I'll tell you is that we're at Fiveable trying to think about how we can best support you all. I mean, obviously this is a very unprecedented situation with almost all of the schools in the United States now being closed for at least 2 weeks and probably longer. And so we're adding daytime streams and different topics and reviews and office hours and things like that. If you go to the Fiveable website, fiveable.me, and you go to whatever AP topic you want, Gov in this case, or if you're in another AP class, whatever that is, you can see all the streams we've added. On the humanities side, which I oversee at Fiveable, there are daytime streams for every subject right now, with the exception of English, and I'm in the process of getting those added with some of my streamers. But there are some daytime Gov streams coming up. There are daytime APUS streams, AP World History, European History, human geography, and more being added. And so just keep looking back at the Fiveable website, as well as just our normal evening streams. So real quick, for in the world of AP Gov, tonight at 9 p.m. is our weekly AP Gov stream. And for those of you that are not familiar with Fiveable, maybe you're just being introduced to it now, check it out. It's on 9 p.m. on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. And Fatima is going to be going over the 14th Amendment tonight and strict scrutiny, and specifically utilizing a bunch of cases that's important for you to know. I cannot tell you how important it is for you to, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, for you to understand the 14th Amendment, because it will definitely appear on the AP Gov test. And I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't show up on the writing portion of the AP Gov test. So if you're still uncertain about the meaning behind the 14th Amendment, the cases connected to it, or if you don't remember what strict scrutiny is, definitely check in tonight at 9 p.m. and she'll be going over that. Okay. If you have other topics that you're like, I need help on this right now because you're not in a classroom with a teacher, please just throw them into the chat, etc. And I'm more than happy to look at adding those here in the foreseeable future. Okay, it's just kind of a dynamic situation. We're kind of moving with it as we go. So, okay, so I'm like I said, in the process of losing my voice, and so just bear with me today. So let's take a look at the rubric. Ashley, we actually have a stream coming up. If you look at it on Fiveable, that is a review of the institutions of government, or that branches of interaction unit 2. It's coming up. I want to say early next week, but it's on the Fiveable website, so you can take a look at that. So probably, I would think. I'm sorry, my dog is excited because she sees someone outside. Kona. Sorry. So I'm going to switch rooms here. You hopefully have seen this rubric before now, okay? And so this rubric covers how you get all of your points that are available on the argumentative essay. So very first thing that you must have is a thesis. And we're going to spend a lot of time here in a few minutes practicing what's a good and what's not a good thesis and how you can create strong theses, or theses, I guess I should say. The second part is evidence, okay, which you can get a maximum of 3 points on, okay? You have to use at least 2 pieces of evidence, okay? One of those pieces of evidence has to come from where? Those of you, you're familiar. So all my people should be familiar. A doc, what do you mean by a doc? Yeah, one of those pieces of evidence has to come from a foundational document, okay? Now, in a prompt, they're going to give you at least 3 foundational documents, which you can choose from, okay? You can utilize one of those 3, or you can utilize another foundational document, but what I always say is utilize one of those 3, because they didn't put it in there for just the heck of it, okay? So pick one that you are most familiar with and you feel like you can strongly use to support an argument, and go with that one. So of the evidence, at least one of the 2 pieces of evidence that you must have must be a foundational document. Now, if you want to use 2 foundational documents that are listed there, great, you can. It's now all done, and you have used both pieces of evidence. But you just can't say something about Brutus 1 or Federalist 10 or the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, whatever. You then, to get your next point, have to give your reasoning, okay? So explain why that evidence supports your thesis, your claim, okay? So don't just drop in Federalist 10 on factions or the Declaration of Independence or whatever. You have to explain, why does that actually relate to whatever I'm claiming in my thesis? And then finally, the last thing is you have to give the counter argument, or the perspective of someone else. So basically you have to give a short few sentences on what other people on the other side would believe and why they might believe that. So that's what the rubric is. So now let's actually take a look at an example that we're going to use for the rest of the stream. Oh, excuse me. No, before we do that, I wanted to throw this method in here. So one of the easy ways to make sure that you are getting all of your points on the argumentative essay is to use the CECC method, okay? So do you have a claim thesis, okay? Do you have that evidence? Remember, 2 pieces of evidence. 1 must be a foundational document. Are you giving commentary, which means are you giving the reasoning why that piece of evidence is important to your claim? And then are you giving a counter? So that's just a quick and easy way to remember the rubric. If you can remember CECC, and as you're writing, think, do I have claim, evidence, commentary, and counter? Well, then you're going to get all the points that are there for you. Now let's take a look at a rubric, or excuse me, a prompt. So this is the prompt that was actually used on last year's AP Gov test. This is the prompt that the students who took AP Gov last year had in May on their AP Gov test, and what's now been released by the College Board. So I'm just going to read the prompt. So the United States Constitution establishes a federal system of government. Under federalism, policymaking is shared between national and state governments. Over time, the powers of the national government have increased relative to those of the state governments. Develop an argument about whether the expanded powers of the national government benefits or hinders policymaking. So first off, what you need to be doing, and hopefully you're already doing in your head right now, is thinking about what the concepts are that are being brought up here, okay? So who can tell me what is federalism? Because if you don't understand federalism, that's a problem. So what is federalism? Yep, the division of power between the state and the federal government, okay? Because we have a federal system, our national government has certain powers that are outlined by it in the Constitution, and our state and local governments have certain powers. Because remember, according to what amendment Any powers not listed in the Constitution are given to the states. What amendment does that come from? Yeah, 10. Perfect. Okay, so, yeah, you guys are making me happy as you remember all this. So, you're seeing federalism unveil or unroll right now with the COVID-19 outbreak because every state is basically making its own decisions when it comes to schools, whether or not schools stay open, for how long they stay open. Why? Because nowhere in the Constitution does it say anything about schools. So that means it's a state power. And so states are the one in this outbreak to make the decision in terms of what should actually happen. Would schools stay open? Would they close, et cetera? That's why some states have closed restaurants down, other states haven't, and yada, yada, yada. It's all federalism, okay? So going back to this prompt here, it's asking you to develop an argument about whether the expanded powers of the national government benefits or hinders policymaking. Now, first thing I want to do with this is just look at the thesis before we go anywhere else with this. We're going to look at some thesis. So I have written a couple theses here that I want that respond to this prompt that I want to talk about with you. And we're just going to take a look at these one by one. So the first one, my first thesis is the powers of government have greatly expanded since the founding of America, hindering policymaking. Is that a good or bad thesis, and why? So tell me good or bad, but why will you think it's either good or bad? Well, Quinn has already laid out that it's terrible. Why? Why is it terrible? I spent a lot of time writing that. So, Ashley, you said it, but it needs a bad because it needs a because. Okay, there's no evidence. Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah, I agree. Have I, in that thesis, have I made a claim? Have I made a claim in that thesis? So I'm seeing all sorts of good things here. So you're saying that I don't, sorry, I just got distracted there for a second. But there's no evidence, there's no counter argument, I don't answer the question. These are all good things. So yeah, this is a really bad thesis, okay? And let's talk about why. Really, all I'm doing here is just restating the prompt. Okay, I've just reworded it, and I'm saying the powers of government have greatly expanded since the founding of America, hindering policymaking. Am I making a claim? Yes. Okay, I'm saying that here. My claim is that the power of government has expanded and is hindering policymaking. Yay, but I don't give it any direction because remember, the purpose of a thesis is twofold. Number one, the purpose of a thesis is to give direction. Okay. Number one is to give your claim, okay, what my opinion is. I've done that here. The part that's missing is to give it direction. So what do I plan to talk about in my body paragraphs that's going to support my thesis, okay? So that's the problem with number one. Now let's take a look at number two. Number two says the powers of government have greatly expanded over the course of American history to a level which the founders never envisioned and was a nightmare that the Anti-Federalists wrote of in Brutus I. Good or bad thesis, and why? So I'm seeing still bad. Well, why is it still bad? I spent a lot of time on that. Okay. So I'm seeing that people are talking about, there's only one piece of evidence. There's no counter argument. Just remember, Brayson, our counter argument is going to be separate from our initial thesis statement. Okay, so yes, you're thinking of the thesis formula, and you're right. Okay, I always tell you in class to start your counter argument the sentence before your thesis, and that's fine. But your thesis statement is just the sentence that gives you your claim and direction. The counter argument is just a sentence that goes before it or wherever, but it's not actually part of your thesis statement. Okay, even though I use it with the thesis formula. Okay. So here's the problem with this. All of you are saying correct things about this, but it's not the big problem. The big problem with this one is that it's not answering the prompt. Nowhere in here am I answering the prompt, because what is the prompt actually asking me to do? What is the prompt actually asking me to do? Bingo, Ashley's correct. If it helps or hinders policymaking, nowhere in this prompt, or excuse me, in this thesis, do I talk about it helping or hindering policymaking, okay? I'm making the beginning of a claim, okay, that the power of government has greatly expanded, and I'm utilizing one piece of evidence, okay, in Brutus 1, but I'm not saying how that relates to the argument. So already, this is where you really can set yourself up for failure, and this is why I say, for the love of all things holy, make sure that you spend time turning off the freak out mode that you're going to be in on AP test day and reading that prompt carefully. Because if you don't read that prompt carefully, you might end up writing an entire essay about something that's not answering the prompt, and you're not going to get any points for it. So if I use this as my thesis, I'm screwed, because I could write a great prompt about how, or excuse me, a great essay about how the federal government's powers expanded, but never answer the question about how that's helped or hindered policy. And the whole essay is just garbage for all intents and purposes when it comes to points. So you have to make sure you read the prompt. So this prompt was freaking out Brain Brobby, who wrote, because I'm freaking out because I'm running out of time on the FRQ section of the test. I'm worried about this question, and I'm typing away, or I'm writing away, and I'm not reading the prompt. Okay, now let's look at number 3. Okay, so number 3 says, times have drastically changed since 1798, and as a result, the federal government's power has expanded to help with the policymaking process. Good or bad thesis, and why? While you type, I'm going to get my bottle of water. Yeah, I'm seeing all the right answers here. No evidence, okay? Is this beginning to answer the prompt? Let me ask that part. So is it answering or beginning to answer the prompt? Yeah, okay, it is beginning to answer the prompt, because I'm talking about whether it's helping or hindering policy. The problem is that it needs more, okay? I need a direction here that I'm going to go. Okay, so still not good. Number 4, it would have been impossible for the founders to envision the scope of the federal government today, because without the expansion of power, there are many instances where the government would have been powerless to make policy, like under the Articles of Confederation. Good or bad? Why? So I'm seeing yeses. I don't know that I 100% agree with you. Any other thoughts? Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the problem is there's only one piece of evidence here, okay? I need a second piece of evidence, because what I'm telling you right now is that one of my body paragraphs is going to be about the powerless of the government to make policy under the Articles of Confederation. That's one of my foundational documents, okay? So, yay, there's a check mark. But I need a second piece to tell you where my second body paragraph is going to go. Because remember, with the argument of essay, really what I would recommend, and your teacher may tell you different, but this is what I'm going to recommend. You need an introductory paragraph that concludes with your thesis statement. 2 body paragraphs, one for each piece of evidence. And remember, one of those has to be a foundational document. And then a quick conclusion paragraph that gives your counter argument. That's what I would say. 4 body paragraphs is what you need to do well with this. Okay. So now what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is why, so Ashley, it depends. So I don't like stepping on your teacher's toes here. It depends on what your teacher means by that. So if your teacher is saying that all you need in the first body paragraph is just a thesis statement, which would be like a 1-sentence thing, that's not a paragraph, that's a sentence. So don't call it a paragraph. And so what I would say is, I mean, to get the point, if that's what you're doing, then I guess at the end of the day, if you have a thesis then you'll get that point. The problem is you're setting yourself up for bad writing habits for other AP classes, especially other AP history classes. If you just do that like in APUSH or in AP World History, which are classes that I also teach, and all you write is just the 1 sentence for the thesis, you're going to be in trouble because there are other things that you need in that introductory paragraph. Same with just in college, okay? And so I would say that you need a little bit more in that first paragraph, whether you go into a counter argument, which is what I tell my students to do, or whether it's just like some type of restatement of the question. But again, I'm going to go back to, yes, correct. So when you took world, you need contextualization. It's the same in APUSH, yeah. But you go with what you're taught. I don't want to step over your teacher's authority, okay? So what I want to do here, okay, so I just saw the question, how long should each paragraph be? So it's a good question, and the answer to that is as long as it needs to be, okay? This is something that drives me crazy a lot of times from when students come from middle school or when they come into their first AP class, because they always want to know, well, how many sentences do I need to write, et cetera. And I hate saying that because the world doesn't tell you need this many sentences or this many words. You need to answer the question. And so what I would say is that your paragraph needs to be long enough to do 2 things. If we're talking about an evidence paragraph. Number 1, state your piece of evidence. And number 2, to give the reason why that piece of evidence supports your thesis, okay? So probably you could do that in 4 to 5 sentences, but that's not this is God's will that you must have 4 to 5 sentences or that must be over that, etc. I would say if you're under that, then probably you haven't done both of those things where you stated your evidence and you also are giving your reasoning for it. So you've got to be careful with that. Okay, so what I want you to do is we're going to spend a couple minutes here making some of these better. So let's start with the easiest one, which is number 4, because it's set up well for you. In the chat, what I would like you to do is type out what would you add as the second piece of evidence for this thesis statement. What would you add for the second piece of evidence for this thesis statement? And just real quick, I'll go back to the prompt. Develop an argument about whether the expanded powers of the national government benefits or hinders policymaking. You can use Articles of Confederation, Brutus 1, or Federalist 10, or you can use some other piece of evidence because I've already used the Articles of Confederation. So what second piece of evidence would you add to that number 4? Give you a minute here. Okay, so I see Quinn's got an answer, and Ashley has an answer. I'm going to wait for some other people to add in here. Okay, so let me look at some of the ones here that have been shared. So Ashley said, and because a stronger federal government is able to make policies that help the public in times of crisis, like the New Deal and Great Depression. Yeah, 100%. Okay, that is fantastic. And I would think that if you answered this question without mentioning the New Deal or the Great Depression in some way in one of your 2 body paragraphs, like, what have you been doing? Because they're perfect examples of when the federal government has grown its power to help with policy, okay? Yeah, Quinn, Medicaid and Medicare, which are block grants, definitely are good examples that you could use here. Grant systems allow for the state implementation after they receive money from the federal government, which can create inconsistent programs between states and hinder consistency. Yeah, that's perfect as well too. And the government needs policy making for instances like quarantining during outbreaks. So here's the problem, okay? You're using a current event writer and you're not going to have the evidence to back it up yet, okay? Because it's unfolding right now. And so, yeah, I don't even know where you would go with that. So you need to use something stronger evidence-wise of something that you've already covered in Gov this year. AIDS, though, I don't know that quarantined. I'm just thinking back through my history, like 1980s and 1990s. I don't know that we were really quarantining for the AIDS epidemic. So, yeah, I just don't think that that's going to be a strong one because it's not really talking about policy. And you need to have something with policy because policy is law that you can give specific examples for. So like Quinn's on Medicaid and Medicare are specific pieces of policy that you can use as an example. Ashley's on the New Deal and Great Depression are great because they're crap tons of policies that you can give examples for. Same with Andrew's in terms of grant systems because you can give examples of grants, whether it's like Medicaid and Medicare like Quinn gave or something else. Those are all ones that you could utilize here. So before I move on here to the next piece here, I want to make sure, is anyone still confused about thesis statements or about writing good thesis statements, what you need to include, etc.? Because like this, I'm here to answer whatever and to help you. So if you're still confused on thesis statements, let me know. Okay, so it doesn't sound like anybody's having any kind of issues. Okay, so let's go back to this prompt for a second. Okay, so what I want to then do now is build a body paragraph. And so we're going to use that last thesis statement that I had, and we're going to build around the foundational document of the Articles of Confederation, okay? And how that was really an example of the government's hindering of power to make policy. So this is where, if you have a piece of paper, it would be good. I'm going to turn off my regular slide sharing screen, and I'm actually just going to you know what? Actually, let me do this. I'm going to turn off this video, and I'm going to share something else instead. I'm going to make just a Word document open here. Give me 1 second. And let me share that with you. Application. Perfect. Okay. So let me go back, and I'm going to pull that. What do I do with it? Let me pull my thesis statement here. Give me 1 second. I just want to pull the prompt so that we have it here on screen with us. Okay. I can't tell because I've never done this before, but do you need me to blow up my text size at all, or are you guys good with the size of the text on the screen right now? If anyone needs me to blow it up, just put it up a bit more. Sure, yeah. Let me do this. Okay, so let's go with this. So we're going to write our first body paragraph. I can type. And this one's going to be on the Articles of Confederation. So remember, I need to do two things here, okay? Number one, I need to state that Articles of Confederation evidence. And number two, I need to explain how that relates back to my thesis. So in my thesis, what I was saying here about this is that there are many instances where the government would have been powerless to make policy like under the Articles of Confederation, okay? So what I want you to do is on your paper, while I'm doing this, I want you to write your body paragraph for the Articles of Confederation, why the government was powerless under the Articles of Confederation. And I'm going to do the same thing on the screen. And then here in just a few minutes, we'll talk about what we have, okay? So you go ahead and do the same thing on your end on a piece of paper. Give you about another minute here to see what you're coming up with. Oh, the prompt. Sorry, I'm just seeing it. I can give you the prompt again. I can type it here. Prompt. Okay, so let's look at what I wrote here for my first body paragraph. So again, like I said, I'm using that foundational document, the Articles of Confederation here, as my first piece of evidence. Okay, so here's what I said. Once we declared independence in 1776, we established our first form of government under the Articles of Confederation. In a little over a decade in which they were in place, the federal government was basically powerless to make policy. Having just left a monarchy, which had taken so many rights of colonists away, they created a new government in the United States, which gave them very little power to the national government, as they were scared that the same thing would happen again. For instance, under the Articles, the Congress did not have the power to tax and relied solely on the states to provide them with money. As a result, when they needed money to implement policy, they didn't have it. More so, there was no executive, so there was no one to ensure that the policies were enforced. As a result, the government's ability to make policy was hindered. So here's my question to you, okay? Don't worry, Ashley, remember I teach this, so I write these all the time. Plus I have a college degree. You're still learning, okay? So don't freak out that like mine was way better, okay? And I just wrote this, right here in front of you. So how do I expand upon my evidence here? Because my evidence is the Articles of Confederation. So how do I, because remember to get the second point on this, you have to give the reasoning, okay? So how do I give the reasoning for how the Articles of Confederation support my thesis? How in that body paragraph did I give that reasoning? I'm going to give you a second here to type. How in that body paragraph did I give the reasoning for how the Articles of Confederation supports my thesis? Yeah, what you guys are saying here in the chat is all 100% correct because I was super specific. I just didn't name drop. Me name dropping would just be like, yeah, well, the Articles of Confederation kind of made the government powerless. Okay, well, you're not wrong, but how? Okay, explain. Okay, and so that's what I did here. And let's see here. As I just highlighted there, explain in this part how the federal government hindered policymaking, because that's the freaking question. Remember, that's why I said get to read the prompt. It's not just asking about how the Articles of Confederation are weak, okay? The prompt's asking about how the power of the government hinders or helps policymaking. So here, I expanded on the Articles of Confederation, okay? Congress did not have the power to tax, okay? That's reason number one. Second thing is, when they needed money to let's go with the text. The second thing is no executive, so no one could enforce. So I gave two different reasons why the Articles of Confederation support my thesis that they hindered the government's ability to make policy. Okay, so does that make, excuse me, Ashley, do you only need one? Ashley, do you mean that you only need one piece of reasoning or evidence to support your Articles of Confederation argument? Is that what you're asking? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So one reason per evidence. So yeah, I put 2 in here, and it would really just be a time thing. Okay. The more you can put in, the better, because that way, if one of your pieces of evidence is not correct, you could still get the other one correct. But it just depends on your time too, how much time you have left to write. Okay. So yeah, you're correct, because remember, for each body paragraph, you need to, one point is from stating your piece of evidence, which in this case would be Articles of Confederation. The other point is explaining, okay, it. And so I explained it twice here is what I did. And so that's the other piece here. And so let me just see here. So would each paragraph be a different topic of your answer, like Articles of Confederation one paragraph and a major court case another? Yes. Okay. So Kayla, what I'd recommend for you to do is here in a few minutes when I wrap up this stream, give me an hour or so, and I'll be posting this stream on Fiveable, the replay. Go back and watch the first part of the stream, because we talked about that in the first part of the stream, and that will certainly help you with that. So let's do, before I move on to a second body paragraph here, does anybody still have questions on the first body paragraph of my argumentative essay? Because like I said, I could spend the rest of the stream just on that if people are having issues with that or still have questions. I'm here for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is we're going to do a second body paragraph, and we're going to do it around, actually really like Ashley's example of the, let's go with the Great Society under LBJ. So let me expand my thesis, because we said this thesis wasn't completely full. It would have been impossible if the founders had envisioned the scope of the federal government today, because without the expansion of power, there are many instances where the government would have been powerless to make policy, like under the Articles of Confederation, and then I'm going to put as well as LBJ's Great Society program. Boom, that's a killer thesis right there, okay? Because I state my claim and I give my 2 pieces of evidence that I'm going to go into. You guys are awesome. Okay, so now let's get a second body paragraph. And this one's going to be on the Great Society, and I'm going to use Quinn's example from the Great Society here to support this. So let me ask you guys before I begin here. So I'm going to use the Great Society. Are you allowed to abbreviate names in your essay? Yes, as long as they're common abbreviations. So like presidents like LBJ, JFK, yeah, that's totally fine, okay? But if it's like a weird abbreviation that like your teacher's made up or that you've made up, then probably not, okay? Okay, so in this Great Society paragraph, okay, I'm making the argument, going back to my thesis, that there are instances where the government would have been powerless to make policy, okay, without the expansion of power, okay? So the Great Society, okay, was a great expansion of power. What could I talk about in this paragraph to show how the government's power expanded under the Great Society? What could I talk about in this paragraph to show how the government's power expanded under the Great Society? Again, what could I talk about in this paragraph to show how the government's power expanded in the Great Society? Yep, Ashley, Medicare and Medicaid, like Quinn said earlier. There's another big example from the Great Society. Social Security, Quinn, yes, if we were talking about the New Deal, because the New Deal was Social Security. What's another big thing that LBJ launched into with the Great Society? Partly because of his background, because he was one before he ever entered politics. My students should know this. Oh, poverty, you're correct, but it's not the one I'm looking for. It's something, the war on poverty, remember the war on poverty is kind of separate from the Great Society. Yeah, Olivia's right, education reform. Remember, LBJ was a teacher on the Mexican-American border and taught poor Mexican and American immigrants. And so education reform was his the other big piece of the Great Society. Healthcare was one, education's the other, okay? Yes, Kayla, you could also use the New Deal instead of the Great Society, and you could talk about Social Security in that, okay? So education reform, remember under the Great Society, in terms of education reform, that Congress passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was the first time in American history where Congress gave out billions of dollars for schools, but especially impoverished schools around the United States. Prior to that, education had been completely up to the states. Money from the federal government never went to education. Okay, for the first time in history, it goes to education. Okay, so watch as I write this paragraph here, and I'm just going off the top of my head. I don't have this pre-planned out, so I'm going to kind of be thinking as I go here. So in the 1960s, LBJ's domestic policy program, known as the Great Society, greatly expanded the role of, or excuse me, I should say the power, because I'm going back to the prompt, the power of the federal government, especially in its ability to make policy. Oops. I'm just as bad at grammar as you guys are. One of the ways this was seen was through the passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So now I've just given my piece of evidence here. I need to explain this and how this relates to my prompt. So now I'm going to start to explain. For the first time in American history, the federal government got involved in public schools, which prior to this had always been a state and local policy area. Let's see here. As a result, billions of dollars of federal aid went to schools in impoverished areas. Because of this expansion of power, the government also expanded its policy making into a new area, education. Okay. So again, if I had time, I would also here go into a second argument, and I would use the Medicare Medicaid argument. Okay. So here my my evidence was the Great Society, and specifically the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And then in this last piece here, I give the reasoning why that supports my thesis, going back to my thesis that the expansion of, because without the expansion of power, there are many instances where the government would have been powerless to make policy, like under the Articles of Confederation, as well as LBJ's Great Society. So the government expanded its policy into education to help those schools that didn't have money. And that's policy that was made. Does anybody have questions about what I just did in that second body paragraph, or about body paragraphs in general with the argumentative essay before I go into the last point? Okay, so what's the last thing that I need to do in my argumentative essay? It's the last thing that I need to do. Yeah, my counter argument, okay? So you can put this in the last paragraph. You can put this at the beginning, just as long as it's there somewhere, okay? So counter argument, here we go. some would say that the federal government has become way too powerful over the course of the last 300 years. There's good evidence for this, especially as we look at major expansion of power and policy under times of war, like World War II, as well as times of struggle, like during the Great Depression, when FDR passed the New Deal, which not only greatly expanded the power of government, but also the debt. So let me go back and look at my thesis here. I'm saying, or the prompt, develop an argument about whether the powers of national government benefits or hinders policymaking, okay? What's my problem with my counterargument? Or is there a problem with my counterargument? Any thoughts? Need to refute it. Yeah, okay. So I actually just purposely did this to see if I could catch any of you. So what I just did here was just gave more example or more evidence to support my thesis. I didn't refute it, okay? I need to refute and say that the power of government has hindered policymaking, okay, is what I need to do in my counter argument. So this is actually just more evidence, okay? What I need to do is that I need to make this about how it's hindered government, okay? So let me see here. Over the course of American history, the government has continued to grow and grow, larger than was ever envisioned. As a result, the policy-making process has been hindered. For example, let's see here. For example, when we look at Congress, I'm just thinking out loud in my head here how I want to scope this. Continue to grow and grow larger than was envisioned. As a result, the policy-making process has been hindered. For example, when we look at Congress, there are now so many different policy areas which they must address that very little is able to be done because their attention is so divided. For example, for many years now, Social Security has been drying up, but Congress has failed to address it because there are so many other policy areas they need to legislate on. So that's a really, really, really rough counter argument, but it gets the point across, okay? Because this is the counter argument that is hindering the government's power, hinders policymaking, okay? This counter argument was not right because I wasn't talking about how the government's power hinders policymaking. I was giving more evidence for why it supports policymaking. I need to go over why it hinders policymaking. So does anybody have any questions on the argumentative essay? Anything that you're still confused on? You know, obviously we just spent an hour on this, but you know, you might still have other questions and you probably need to practice, but I'm hoping that this helped a little bit. Okay, so for my people, just a couple other quick things. Tomorrow you've got and it's already up there if you want to start on it, but on Canvas, you've got a writing practice assignment with an argumentative essay, taking these things into account. That's due at 9 p.m. tomorrow night. You can go in and you can start on that now. On Thursday, we'll be back on Fiveable at noon. I'll be doing a live review of the Institutions of Government, or Unit 2 of Gov. And then Friday, you guys have a take-home test on the Institutions of Government, okay? So in the meantime, check out Fiveable. There's all sorts of great streams that are happening during the day, at night. That 14th Amendment one's happening tonight. And there's also a nightly COVID update if you're interested. So other than that, thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a great break. See ya.